Welcome back, class. Today we're going to cover the topic of body art and body modification. And we're going to see different examples from the past and from the present on how humans have either decorated or changed their body to reveal aspects of beauty and identity. But before we start going into our examples, I want you to be able to take note. I'm going to describe, what things to look out, to look for. And in each culture that we present, I want you to take note of how they modify their bodies and what this means to them. I'm going to go through the list of things if they reveal, aspects of beauty, perhaps of ethnic identification, of gender ideology, or perhaps a type of social identification. And I will go through each one and explain those in detail. Okay? So, we know the body is the first canvas that humans used as a form of visual communication to tell others who they are and where they are from. So in other words, it's the first form of identification to reveal to other humans in their territory, where they came from, what group they belong to, and perhaps, this is a communication to say, are you a friend or are you a threat? So think about how we use our, what type of forms of identification we use today. We have several forms of identification, from driver's license to, school IDs, to passports. So each one serves a purpose. They give you permits, to be at a certain area. Our driver's license will reveal what state you're from, what your age, what restrictions you have, where you live, etc. And if you want to travel abroad to another country, then that's where you require a different form of identification, passports, visa, permits, that will allow you access to that territory. So in the same way, think about how perhaps ancient humans began to use the body and their markings as a form of identification, to reveal if they can enter territory, to reveal who they are, and perhaps what social status or what role they play for that group, and so forth. So from here we will get the body in the past and in the present is a form of visual language. The way we decorate our body and modify it, we are communicating. We are letting people, other people that recognize these markings, these changes, these are social symbols. And they can represent different things. They can represent social values, ideas of beauty, what we see as, what we uphold as the concepts of beauty here in the West is not necessarily the same concept of beauty across the world. Things like that. It could reveal a person's social status, economic status, and so much more that we'll go into. All right? Because the body is a form of, it expresses the individual's identity. And this identity belongs to the person, but it also belongs to a larger whole. And I will go into the mindful body in a second. These are the things I'm going to cover. Next, I'm going to cover aesthetics, concepts of beauty in detail, ethnic identity, like ethnic boundaries, as I just discussed, gender and sexuality, ideas that the body reveals of this, and social identity. Each one of these I'll break down and present this. But as I mentioned, the body serves multiple forms. It is, as the study of the mindful body reveals, this is a study in medical anthropology. This study was carried out to reveal perhaps how people view illness and how, understanding, across the globe, how different people view the body can help not only the field of medicine, but also, the field of anthropology and sociology and so forth, about different fields. So the mindful body reveals that the body is divided, when we're looking at a form of expression, it's divided in three forms. One is the individual self, to be aware this is your body and this, it belongs to you and you are part of this bigger group. But the second one is the body as a social canvas, as a cultural symbol. This is where the body is used and viewed as the relationship between nature, society, and culture. So think about different philosophies or belief systems that how different cultures enculturate children, how we raise them. Do we raise them to be individuals? Like, you are responsible for your actions. You are, you're on your own. You are an individual on this planet. Or do we raise them to be viewed part of a larger whole, like a collective whole? For example, let's say you are responsible for the reputation of this family or of this lineage, or you are also representing this belief system, etc. So the body can carry either different weight and different cultural symbols. There are philosophies that, for example, in the West, how we are raised as, to be more individualistic, like an individualistic society, geared towards, more materialism, where in other philosophies, they are trying to guide the body into not looking at itself as an individual, but as part of, the whole, even part of the environment. There are cultures that look at the body as part of nature. They describe the body as being part of the mountain, and therefore, they must have this relationship with nature, and the body nature and the body are not separated. So the environment and the body are as a, reveal a larger aspect, a larger whole. So other parts of the body serving as a cultural symbol, as we had mentioned, will be ethnic markers. You belong to this social group or ethnic group, etc. And from this, in many cases, the body becomes a political artifact, a social or political artifact. And these are cases where, in many times, not all the time, but in many times, where a group of people, a community feels threatened for any reason. The threat could be real or the threat could be imaginary. But by feeling this threat of losing this way of life or a tradition, this is where we find that the body becomes the focal point, like an artifact. So it becomes like a political artifact. And this is where regulations, surveillance, and control, it could be over an individual or a collective whole of bodies. Examples of this are, gender ideology, control over reproduction. In some cases, controlling population control, or in other cases, controlling, the woman's body. And this, in many cases, it is not, in many cases, it has been the woman's body that has become, the center and the focal point of becoming an artifact for the social group. And looking at, what is sexually appropriate behaviors and so forth, and how the body should be dressed or controlled, basically. So here, when the body becomes a political artifact, this is where there is a power and control over, like I said, either the individual or collective whole. They're trying to control the social body and to also discipline the individual body. And from here we have an example of this is an example here in the U.S. That we look at a situation where the community felt threatened, and therefore the body became a political artifact. It was in the case of the Salem witch trials. These, in this time, these communities, they were undergoing, the Puritans, they were undergoing severe change, modernity, and for that case. And there were women that had achieved to be property owners, and were also being, were socializing with outsiders, with foreigners, and they stopped dressing the way Puritans traditionally dress. So there was a change in the social body. What was, this idea of what relationship the body had to the larger whole. And so in this transition and this change, when you take your history classes, you'll get a lot more details on this. But in this transition is where then the scapegoating of sorcery began. And so these, in particular, women or such families that were transitioning and moving away from this tradition, they were accused of practicing witchcraft, and they were led, to these trials and executed in public. So this is an example of gender ideology and work. For example, like I said, the women were, began earning money. They were property owners. Their behaviors, they in some cases, some, even drank alcohol and so forth. So the idea and the social, canvas and the way women dressed began to change, and therefore they felt threatened, and it led to this control. In many cases, this, body politics will lead to violence. Other cases of body politics, when the body becomes the focal point of either a political representation or of social control, it doesn't necessarily have to be violent or almost imposed. It can be weaved into the fabric of our ideology. For example, what is the ideal body? What is, the ideal body varies very vast across cultures. And so the ideal body is stressed among society, and people, modify their bodies to either achieve like a social status and so forth. And I'll give some examples of this, how the body becomes much more than aesthetics, concepts of beauty, and even a form of ethnic identity. it enters into, it becomes like an artifact for gender ideology and social, social identity. Okay. First, let me explain, when you're looking at examples of aesthetics, in each group, it doesn't have to only be one. I want you to be able to identify it and express it, describe it. When we're looking at aesthetics, this is concepts of beauty. And, it could be in which the object or form pleases the sense of the beholder. Beauty is described to have, it's described to have rhythm, such as movement. It could be dancing, the way the body moves, the way the body performs, etc. It can also have to do with symmetry, the proportion. In this case, we're looking at the shape of the body, or what parts of the body are modified or shaped, where we find these concentrations of beauty or sensuality, because it's not the same everywhere. Some places we'll see in a moment, but such as the West, there's a great focus on on a youthful face or augmentation of breast, etc. And that is not necessarily the case for across the globe. The other thing that beauty reveals is emotion. It must give a feeling, like when you're looking at something beautiful, it must reveal communicate a feeling of sublime, of awe, of greatness. And in many cases, these ideas of beauty, of aesthetics, are an imitation of nature. We, think of descriptions to describe something beautiful. Let's see, the smile as bright as the sun, or her hair as dark as the night, or eyes that shine like the stars, etc. So you get the idea, and there's so many expressions and of this. And if you pay attention, when the description of beauty, of aesthetics, it usually reveals an imitation of nature. Now, what is aesthetically pleasing for some, it could be familiar to some, and to some people it can make them feel alienated. In other words, to have culture shock. Because what is, again, the idea and concepts of beauty are not universal. Okay? All right, so now we're going to look at ethnic identity. When we see these modifications, see if they're, communicating a form of ethnic identity. And ethnicity, we had already covered this term at the beginning, but ethnicity is a sense of feeling a connection to a group of people who believe either you share a common history, a culture, or sometimes ancestry. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, from a direct, lineage. In many cases, it could be an ancestral lineage, but you may share a common history, perhaps also territory. Kinship is where you document extended family groups. This tells you who is related to who. So kinship is the lineage of who married who, and so forth, how you're related to them. Okay? And ethnicity in the body as a form of body art. And we'll look at several examples of this. Body art, as forms of, we'll see an example of scarification. It could also, it could reveal, what group you belong to, what lineage, what status, but also the type of markings could also reveal the origin stories, the cosmology of the people, where they believe they came from, and the original story, the myth where that provides how they came to be. And they also the marks on the bodies, as I had mentioned before, could be ethnic markers. And this is, again, it's territorial. It's communicating to someone, I belong to this group, or I belong to this territory. This is a form of of boundary markers. Okay. All right. So now we'll go into gender and sexuality identity. Let me start by distinguishing the terms. When we talk about sex, this is the biological difference between male and female. What sexual organ they were born with, and that's it. But when we talk about gender, this is more complex. This has to do with ideas rooted in culture, in society. They could be psychological constructs and classifications that people impose depending on on the society, on the culture. So this is where we find people are, their society is imposing what we call ideas of, perhaps masculinity, femininity, third gender. How society is imposing these expectations. And this varies across the world. So different cultures have different expectations and roles, what we call gender ideology, of what is to be masculine, what is to be feminine, what the third gender has existed, and in ancient times, and in many cultures across the world, it has always been accepted, and a certain identity and ideology has always been assigned. But in these examples that I will present today, I want you to pay attention in particular to the gender ideologies. These are, the relationships between people and how they are to behave, what is expected of them, what is sexually appropriate, what is attractive, what is appropriate forms of dress, of marriage rules. So how is the body used as a form of expression to reveal all of this, to reveal what role, what gender role they are to play, what markings on that person reveal that they are now eligible for marriage, and so forth. So here we're looking at the social expectations, and also how these social expectations reveal ideas of beauty, of social identity, and of and in many cases it becomes part of a larger whole. The body, based on changes or that have to do with these ideas, then the body becomes a conversation. It becomes a political artifact. All right? If you have any questions on this, please just email me. Okay. And when we're looking at the social identity, this reveals, for example, the economic class, the role that they're playing, or perhaps the status. And think about, how do we know who are the leaders of a community, or of a society, or of a nation? Think of the examples of the king, of the queen. They wear They wear the markings, they wear crowns, they are revealing they come from a lineage, etc. In other cases, how do we know who are the religious specialists of of a belief system or a locality? And their sometimes their dress or the markings on their body will reveal this. The way they, let's say a Catholic priest, the way that they dress, an imam or a rabbi, you should be able to distinguish who are the religious specialists. And on in a different in a more local group, you will also be able to distinguish in many cases based on what they're wearing or how they've modified their body. But the body decor and modifications also reveal a social status. The most common form of social status within our society, think about the wedding ring. Not all cultures, not all weddings require a wedding ring. This is not, across the board. But let's say here in the West, we find a common practice of using the wedding ring, which reveals the person is now married, is no longer available. But there are other markings on the body. Some are even severe modifications of the body to reveal that the person is a virgin. And we will touch on that later on. It's a bit more complex. But another example we will see today is a group that reveals on their body, that reveals, that they've reached a state of maturity and they've obviously undergone a rites of passage and are now eligible for marriage, and they are also able, they have entered the reproductive stage of adulthood, etc. So the body can express many things. In the social class, the nobility, in the past, I've described how, in the case of the Mayas, how they would carry out certain rituals to distinguish that they were the ones in power. But we will look at some examples today on how body modifications were also used to distinguish nobility, the elite. And also, in many cases, such as in the past as in the present, people are always trying to follow the lead of the nobility, try to copy them as well. In our commercial and in our commercial society, our consumer society, one of the ways that people try to express a social class is in the products and the brands that they wear. And this, as we've talked about before, as fetishisms, commodity fetishisms, it is a form of, revealing, I have this brand or I have this product, and on a social scale, that product was very expensive. So it's a try to imitate, obviously the more affluential or nobility by holding these expensive products and either wearing them or owning them, etc. All right, so let's go on to our examples so we can apply them. Again, these examples identify if they're doing it for beauty, for ethnic identity, or are they ideas that are, that they depend on for like social ideology, gender ideology, the ideas of what role they are to play if they are eligible for marriage, and also the social status and social identity. like what status they have in society. I'm going to start with the Mayas, the ancient Mayas. One of the things that has captured the interest of people throughout the world is their cranial modifications. The ancient Mayas would modify their heads right at birth. And so as soon as, the baby was born, how the cranial is very soft. And that is when the mothers or, the midwives would either wrap the baby's head. So we call using bands. So it would tighten the baby's head. Or in other cases, we have documentation from the colonial period that they even used boards to press on the baby's head. And here we see an artifact. This is a mother holding her child, and we can see that he either has like a the headbands that would be used to tighten. And in other cases, there were several forms of modifications, but here. The goal of this is the lowland Mayas. The lowland Mayas are Mexico, are the ones where they're at the curve. This is like the Yucatan Peninsula, the area of the famous pyramid of Chichen Itza, and so all of this area going all the way, kind of South Mexico. Those are the lowland Mayas, and this represented status, so only those of the elite, and this began about 3,000 years ago. So the elite, the ones in power, the ruling class and their lineage, that was a form to distinguish them. They would modify their heads to be long, and scholars have looked at, they've identified that this not only represented kinship, in other words, you come from this lineage, it also represented ethnicity, a boundary marker, ethnic boundary markers to other Mayas, to other indigenous groups of the area. We know that in Mesoamerica there was trade routes all the way to central Mexico and perhaps even here to the Americas. So there was trade routes, and there was an influx of always meeting different groups. And so this also represented an ethnic boundary. And as we know, it also at the beginning, when it started about 3,000 years ago, it represented status and aesthetics. It was a form of looking. If they were ruled by the divine, they were the descendants of the gods and of the ancestors. Then they were divined, and this represented beauty. Some scholars have noted that perhaps this represented the corn god as being elongated. To represent the corn, because as I had mentioned, perhaps the modifications represent the story of origins. And for the Mayas, they emerged from corn after several attempts and several creations. Finally, man was created out of corn. And that is why corn is also still very vital. Corn gave rise to the civilization, where they were able to domesticate it. They were able to stay sedentary, no longer have to move around, and be able to build cities and provide food for a larger populations. So corn is very vital, not only to the origin stories, to the rise of the civilization, but even today, corn is viewed as something vital and sacred. Okay, so we see these types of modifications. From colonial times, this was practiced all the way that it was about probably 1,800 years ago that this practice started moving on from not only the elite, but the most of the population started adapting this as a form, as I had mentioned, before, always trying to reflect and imitate and or inspired by those in power. Then many people started also doing this to their children. The Bishop Landa, the one that burned all the codices and documents, in his diary, he writes that he witnessed how they would do these modifications, and this is where we get this description of the boards. And the mother, they, as soon as the baby was born, they would put the two boards and start, and tighten it and hold the baby still. And then after the board would modify, they would continue with holding it with the bands. And they would carry out what is called hetzmek, which is, it would be like the naming ceremony. And this is where, this is a tradition that's still practiced today. Today, they refer to it as the Mayan baptism. And so after the baby is born, probably after the first month, between the first and third month, the baby, they conduct a hetzmek. And where, they call the family, and they call the padrinos, like a godfather to them, but they do a ceremony led by a local Mayan priest. And here I witnessed the hetzmek, and when I took my daughter, and she was a little older than 3 months, so she had passed that time, but they did a hetzmek for her. And what they do is they also implement the gender ideology. So when they're boys, they bring either like a machete or a knife, and they're doing this blessing, and they're guiding them. And this is for you to work the cornfields, to have the tools, and then they also now implement like a book and a pencil, but you must also study. So they're blessing the child, but with the roles that they might apply as adults. And for the girls, they bring different elements, such as the tortillas, and also that they will be helping in the kitchen and have these gentle roles, and also as well be educated. So they bring the paper and the pencil, and they do the ceremony. For the ancient Mayas, this period was a naming ceremony. This is when they would administer the name, and then they conducted this ritual for the baby. So we don't have too much information on more of the ritual other than what Landa described, but we see that it is something that is continued today among the local Mayas. So again, here we find how a modification was solely for those in power, those of the elite, and then later on it started moving on to the local people. And even where this became later on as a form of ethnicity, of an ethnic boundary to mark this area, in particular the area of Chichen Itza. The way the Mayas divided themselves, they were a part of kinship, of lineage, and so every city, every pyramid, every construction, they were part of a lineage, a family. And there in Chichen Itza, they were known as the Itzais. And the Spanish colonial texts reveal that they were able to distinguish, the groups based on the shape modifications that they had. They would know that this, these people, in the case of the Itzais, they still continued to have this practice even after the Spaniards arrived and tried to, stop this. Over here, we have an older civilization than the Mayas. They're from central Mexico. These are called the Olmecs. These are huge stela, or huge faces that you find, and there's several of them. I mean, this is so big. I am about 5'4", and I reach about probably under the ear, right here. So this gives you an idea of how big these are. For the Olmecs, they're a very ancient culture in central Mexico. And we do not have any archaeological data or evidence, artifacts, because none, so far none have been recovered. But we do know that they also practice a form of cranial modification from the art that they left. And in all these arts, their cranial modification is different than the Itzais. They have a more, round, pear-shaped face, and the headbands in all of their artwork from the Olmecs, when they present, the faces, they always show like these headbands, and we know that their faces it's just represents a different modification. All right, so here we know that the rulers were the ones that initially did this. Other forms of expressions of decorating the body to reveal status were the teeth. The Mayas were excellent dentists. There's archaeologists have noted, from the elite, from the few the few tombs that they have found, such as King Pakal up here, they noticed they didn't have cavities, and they would modify their teeth and place precious gems. To them, jade and turquoise were very valuable. And they would also shave down their teeth to represent as a form of a T. As you see here, this is the mask that was found in King Pakal in Palenque, in Palenque, Mexico. So here, what the T represents, archaeologists have noted that it's a symbol for ik, for wind, and the wind represented either breath, life, and it is something that is still today they don't modify their teeth as such, but the idea of calling upon the winds, calling upon the iks, is still very common among local Mayas. And this is what the local Ahmen, the priest, does. He can communicate with the winds and call them down. So I found this very interesting, that they would mark the T in the center, so that they would shave their teeth down and also put it in, in their mask. And we also find it in many structures and buildings. Okay, but look at what we do today. I don't know if any of you have seen this yet. This is something that is gaining popularity, and these are gems that people could get done, and it doesn't require going to a dentist. This you can get done at any, for example, at any aesthetic shop. And so these are forms that people, modern, today, are using as a form of aesthetics to reveal. And I found, the links or similarities fascinating on how the ancient Mayas use this as a form of aesthetic to represent beauty, but also status, and as well as status, lineage, kinship, and then again it became something very popular. All right, so now let's look at an example of gender ideology mixed with concepts of beauty, social class, and then also becoming a part of the body becoming part of a political artifact. These are body modifications, and they vary, different. These represents usually when girls undergo a rites of passage to mark that they are eligible for marriage. But in the case of Chinese foot binding, this was a mutilation, a modification that they would do to the body. And mutilation, the definition when we're talking about mutilation, it means either removing a body part or hurting a part of the body or so forth. So I don't mean to use it as, with like a negative tone, but when we talk about, modifications or mutilation, this will come up again in a debate. So here, this was rites of passage for this was for the Chinese, and it would mark that the girl was now eligible for marriage. Now, this was practiced in China about 1,000 years ago, and it survived all the way up to the 20th century. So, and this, I'll give you a little bit of the history as I go along. But the way this came about, this was considered to be absolutely beautiful and to represent refinement. And this would almost guarantee that the girl would be eligible for marriage. But how did this, come about? So the history of this comes from the emergence of the Chinese emperors. And when China started becoming, having emperors, they would bring women from different ethnic groups that they would find more exotic to entertain the emperor. And some of these women that they brought had very small feet that the emperor found very attractive and different. And they would perform for the emperor, etc. So from here on, this was about like the 10th century, then women that were in this social class of the elite of the royal court, they began doing this to their feet as a form to distinguish that they were part of the royal court. And therefore they would start, this was something that was done from women to women, from mother to daughter. And as their daughter, before the age of puberty, they would begin to modify, to start, modifying their feet this way, to start, mutilating their feet to become this. And this was something, like I said, it was considered to be of a very high class and refinement. And it started becoming very popular that people that were outside the royal court would do this to their daughter in hopes that they would be able to marry upward In other words, that they would be able to marry someone wealthy. And then this became more of like a social obligation for the girls to do this for their family. The girls knew that they carried their family's reputation on their feet. And this was a long process. And the concept of beauty at this time would be considered the smaller the foot, the more exotic, beautiful, and refined that woman, that young girl was. The size of the famous lotus feet, what he's holding in your hand, it's smaller than your iPhone. And this was a sign of purity. Now let's pay attention. It was referred to as the lotus flower. And because of its symbolism, reflecting, delicacy and beauty and purity, they would describe the women that would walk with binded feet as almost walking in their tippy toes, and it looked like they were floating, just like the lotus flower floats on the pond, and it just moves gracefully. And then its roots of the lotus feet represent the roots to the family. So they would do this, but they could not do it so small that the woman could not walk. Because there, again, remember when we talked about aesthetics, had to do with movement, with rhythm, with symmetry, with the shape. And so beauty was concentrated on the feet, on binding the feet. And this was seen as something very elegant and refined, a reflection that you were a good daughter, and therefore you would make a good wife and a good mother. And again, this is something that was done to little girls. It was like a 2-year process of how they would start manipulating and binding the foot. This was before the girl entered, right before she began puberty, and they would first break the foot, press as we see here. Here's a description. They would, from the big toe, they would break all the toes and make it flat. And then from here, not only would they press them flat, but they would also arch. They would break the arch, so it would pick up. And you can see here in this description. And this took about a 2-year process. It was very, very painful. Many girls died from gangrene, and those that survived were reflected and were very honored to have this. Like I said, it represented social mobility. Those that were at the royal court, that this was something exotic. It's something that the emperor had. And therefore, those of the elite start copying the emperor and start looking for eligible wives that, that would have small feet. And therefore, later, the rest of the population would do this to their daughters in hope that they would marry someone wealthy. And this was a lot of stress, to where the body is no longer an individual. It's part of a larger whole. The young girl, like I had mentioned, wears the family's reputation on her feet. And it carried a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility to not only undergo this painful process, but to still be able to walk and to move in this manner. Later on, in about 1279, when the Mongol Empire invaded China, then he had started doing away with this practice. But women and ethnic groups, they they continue doing it as a form of ethnic identity and pride and resistance. So then the Chinese foot binding moved on from being, it was still considered aesthetic and still part of the girl's obligation, gender ideology, and class. But now it moved on to become more of a political aspect, where this was a form of ethnicity and also a form of resistance to this change and this invasion that was taking place. And it was not until about 1912, with European expansion and capitalism taking over, into that campaigns to liberate the feet and make this practice illegal began. And again, this is from the 10th century up to the 20th century. And women would still do this as a form of tradition and ethnicity. And, there's still, today, it's very rare to find women with binded feet, but anthropologists had, I believe the last report I saw was in 2007, and the lady was about almost 90 years old. But perhaps we don't doubt that this practice may still continue. What took place that was also a form of resistance when the idea of liberating the feet and making this illegal came about. They forced women to remove the cover, to remove the bands, and this was very shameful, because the idea of aesthetics and beauty was not to see the feet. The feet were always wrapped. It was about about having small feet, and the shoe. The shoe became a form of social status. Once this permeated into the public sphere, that more people were doing it that were not part of the royal court, the way to distinguish who, if you were from an elite class, was the shoe. And so those very finely embroidered, crafted shoes represented that the person had an elite status, and so forth. But nonetheless, in both the local people and the elite class, the foot was not to be seen. It was always covered. And so when these campaigns came about to make this illegal, it also brought this mixed feeling and made this, brought shame to this practice. So let's do a little cross-cultural, observation of other cultures and how they've modified their body as a form of aesthetic, of gender ideology, and social class. This, for example, is a picture of the age of the Victorian stage in England. And there, they wear these corsets. They would wear these corsets to reveal, to have a tiny waist. And on a medical, observation, this causes deformation of the body and also impacts the organs. But let's say in our today, what do people do that is fine, as aesthetically pleasing, attractive? Some find it as a form of, gender representation, and social class. Well, it depends, I guess, on the brands of the shoes and stuff like that. But look at this, high heels. Any specialist, any podiatrist, a foot specialist will tell you that any type of heel causes deformation of the feet. And yet, across the world, across the world, but in particular in our industrial societies, many people wear extreme high heels as a form of aesthetics, of beauty, of sensuality. And this is a picture, an x-ray of later on of the deformation that this could cause to the deformation. This is a picture of, of a deformed foot, and this as well on the heel. Women are walking on their tippy toes, as still seen as something sensual. Look at this. This is a picture of ballerina feet. And you could talk to anyone that that is a professional ballet dancer, and you could look up articles and documentaries on this, as the deformation and pain that they endure to carry out this, this very eloquent, what we call eloquent dance performance. And when you think about ballet in our society, it also represents refinement, beauty. Women are referred to as like swans, moving around. They walk around in their, they perform and dance. Also men. And this whole performance is done on, on the very tips of the toe. This is a very challenging and painful process that their feet go to, and yet we still see it as a form of, of refinement and beauty. Although it does not hold, from either a gender ideology where this was required to be eligible for marriage, these types of aesthetics and concepts of beauty that we have today do not. Or at least, I guess it depends on the preference. All right, so let's finish off with the Mercy. And this is another form of body modification that also represents aesthetic, ethnicity, and gender ideology. This represents that the girl is now available for marriage and has entered puberty and is now in the reproductive stage. So here the fertility expressed, just as the Chinese foot binding is worn on the feet, here it is worn on the lips. Now, the Mercy people, the Mercy tribe, they are actually called the Mun, M-U-N. Mercy is the language that they speak, and that therefore they're more popularly known as the Mercy people. They live in the Omno Valley here, which is close to Sudan. And they are mostly cattle herders and depend on their crops. In population, there's probably, the estimate is probably about 10,000. But they have become a fascination to the world because of, they have drawn attention because of their cultural practice and ideas of beauty and their rites of passage for women. And so now this also, for the Mercy, the lip plate also represents a form of ethnic identity. So they live in an area where there are different ethnic groups, and this is one form to distinguish and to mark that they are, that they are part of the Mercy, that they are a Mercy ethnic group. And so the plate represents, again, beauty, sexual maturity, and eligibility for marriage. Now, when this happens, right before puberty, the girl receives a piercing, and they use a wooden plug. And as time goes, they start stretching it and inserting different sizes of plates. These plates can get very large, up to 12 centimeters or more. So the original plate is, the colors are solid. But what is taking place today is that this practice and this tradition has now become part of what we call the political body. And this has drawn a form of ethnic tourism from all over the world to come meet the Mercy, but they come and see them like as a form of wonder and awe, and they come and they come to see their cultural practice. And from this, the body is now seen almost like a form of, a living museum. And this has pros and cons to it. Just as we, it has brought, awareness of the culture. But the form of ethnotourism has also changed their practice, as now they are having an influx of tourists that come, and so they have started changing, decorating their place to be more attractive to the tourism, because there's an exchange for money to give permission to allow them to take their picture. And so the body becomes now a commodity. And I'm going to give you a video that gives you an example of this. And the other part that the body has become part of, of a larger scale of a political body, is that the Ethiopian government, in an effort to, expand the territory and integrate them, and they have tried to stop this practice and discourage them from continuing their tradition, and they want to integrate them. And here, the Mercy have found a form of resistance as well. So it's aesthetic, ethnicity, gender ideology, and then also, reflecting that they are now eligible for marriage, and they have entered puberty. But it also now has become part of a larger whole, looking at the body as commodity, and now as a form of resistance. All right, so the practice of using a plate is not only, we find it in different cultures, and it's not only designated to women. This gender ideology could also be applied to men as well. And later on, we'll see other examples of body modifications that are done to males. But in Brazil, there is a group called the Kayapo, and the Kayapo also the plate represents ethnicity, but it also represents status. Only those only those babies that are born, those male babies that are destined to be like the leaders, they get pierced right at birth, and then they start expanding the plate until they reach the rites of passage and rites of full adult, probably around the age of 20, and therefore they take their position as the leader. And so here we have it's a form of social expression, social adulthood, ethnicity, and status. I'm sure it's also considered a form of aesthetics, but because the men that wear the plates represent that they are strong and that they are aggressive. And this also even gives them authority to be aggressive towards others, even in their group. So here we have, this is the Kayapo Brazil, and here we have the Mercy. Okay, so let me play the video of the Mercy. Before I do, this is the exam question that is going to be from the film. So please take note. And this film, you have access to it. I have the title here and the link. It's called Framing the Other. So I want you to pay attention what the lip plate represents to them, and how this cultural practice has been impacted, how it's been changing, and give some examples from the film, not only from my lecture. Describe what you see, describe the changes, describe the different modifications, and then describe the interaction between the tourist and the Mercy. Okay, Let me play this film for you. Here's the film.
So ka gi be he mi tanga tan nai ki mo ana lu ko jey ko ro giro huna gi ko ka ba ti ni na durana me kala bin ina durana mu ti na kala ha ti ti bu agi be he na mi tanga tan na kartu ha gana ko wanya tan ti huna ka ba he hunya ngayo yo to ka ti ti ngati ti ne oi
My name is Nel Kaptein. I'm an assistant midwife. I come from Holland. I think it's great to see the Mercy. I think it's very special to see the woman with the lip plates and the paintings on her body.
Kaya haraganya madami nyan king ba kini ke hinai meti raganya ushi meti ram fitel bi dene anai ngana ni kelo ko ragan ti ko duaga ni da kana ronga ni ki nga du na rono ko itu ngani kire watanan kwat kudu ko gwana bữa tháng này thì cúi nên chỉ là coi kia là coi mà nó hư cúi này cắm này nên để bữa tháng này coi mà coi có hành cúi này nó cắm này nên tí nè nó ra hai cái đàng hai cái chỉ có nam mà nhà có nam kia có nam nào không có hai không rồi là tiêu li bữa tháng này kêu tụi mình đà nhưng mà tiêu li bữa cái bé đà là rẻ cái tụi gì nó hư cúi này chỉ cần những anh ukun này cái thằng lão bé cái lò ran
Our tour leader gives us a briefing and he says that the Mercy are the only tribes in Ethiopia with lip plates, and he says that we must pay for every picture that we take. Every picture is 2 birr and for a child 1 birr. In the past you didn't pay, but at that moment you must pay for all pictures. But I want to have the pictures, so I pay. The most I want is a picture from a woman with a big lip plate and earrings. And I like to take pictures of women with a little child, a baby, and little children are playing together, hopefully. And that kind of pictures I want to take. I hope it's possible.
Ka lo ki bikin như mình những tuần nó có dàn kiểu tí nó quay cái bụi ngà cái gì ngà có dàn cái tay cái đi ngàn alo chala alo mình lúc cứ ngà vào đi nè ngay kim nó có dàn kiểu nó rong bự lên bữa sáng kiểu nó màu rồi nó cắt ra nè anh có dàn kiểu con anh bữa nó có dàn ngà bữa nó có dàn ngà tí war ko oyo kari cái đây cái gì cái rasa ini nak kim nak cái ngang coi tiếng coi chuyện chỉ tin như vậy theo tích thế nào mua đồ đòn đòn nó này là cái đồ cái giờ cái đây cái tin như vậy là kiện cái giờ kalau dia binga huli rana hin mai kaje tan hin tidai kaje de bion huli ke huli tidai to kan cabui so kan cabui lu nya to mana an kite to bui kuru tuan huli kala ko je tan na ke jone bru huli tara tu na huli na tu ni ngai ani ko nyor boy ni ki ko ri tu senya kan ne on tu ni ngai ani ki huli adure ay ko jende dituan kemi tinga ngana ko adure ay huli ad yuri ki bina kemi tinga ngana huli ad danga ay kemi tinga ngana holo wa kemi tinga ngana ko dul ne ke kya mo ahir no anu ni bude di halna ke ngana huli no ke tra bala huli na ke ina huli de binga karakta kala ko loko mon ni hoy ko nay na kaji hen ba ko ji hen tir huli ni nge ni ko la mi huli.
It's important for me to take pictures.
When I come back in Holland, I put the pictures on the computer and then I see them bigger. And then I see what the most beautiful picture for me is. I put it in a frame on the wall. And when I come home, I put the Mercy women with the lid plates in the frame.
Uli karu nga mare ne ja no na me karu nga uli karu nga eje ni ku gwi sho huni nga eje ye de pia nga dir huna ya he hulu wa bra bale nga de dua mana ya he kata de bitu kata de dinga nga na ya ta ku te nga nga ko uli de dia na ya ku na kita na ku te ru ka ku te pura na ku de ku ji ndula tu nya ho nya ti na ka ku te ti di de chi Buat ada nahira ada naik jenga aji berharga dari kulit kan hira kalau malu ni aji berharga rama kuna air ni kuna hira kiana ngangan kiana tebuang kalau nu kiana nggak kalau janga uli buah bae uli kejo ni teh ke ani kejiran atau naik ini uli kiana kalau nggak ani kejo nak akan tu jenis kan ya yang madin bera yo eja mo ya tu eja tu eja dah eja burun adina biduna kajamat kajian ngada harancinya dah itu Cina harancinya dah kali tapi rumah tomato ni tadi di ada dua man nyeren lagi dia mau yang kalau mau dia kejual ni ciri ciri ibu orang aja so kiki bingati na ngai iwana biru hali
My cameras are in my backpack. I'm ready to take a lot of pictures from the Mercy. I'm ready for it. I hope to see a lot of women with lip plates and a lot of decoration. I hope to see how they live, how they make food. Maybe I can drink a cup of coffee with each other. I hope to see a lot of women in the village.
Kalau awalnya mana tu nak orang dua lama ha uji sana ki uji na tu di bin ba di dah halanya awal itu terus ya. Tidak ada mungkin nak muni. Gen boy ang agin alam ya gen boy ang kimi nga chali. Lu kupon ni abu nga karagi di na chali. Lu kalau nga agak sahur nga. Kahi nga ha kecil mu daya nga hung na anak aja terus kata le buru dia ba aku jadi tua hun. Aku tu anak hang bikinnya, tetapi nak bikinnya kabur. Kalau muhuna hula bikinnya ada kali aran Cina anak nanti keciri wangan. Bikin aku bikin keciri na ya kalau dene huna hula berkunjung kunca aran Cina anak keciri wangan dah, nanti keciri wangan dah kan dia punya. Kalau aja kita kalau aran Cina, kita kaya tu kita curi hijau kebun, mesti biar rasa. Ibu nusia anak kalau nggak kita terus ini. Aba hin saharan siya uli ka telingon loy ka hindi na dito maro Take your jet to a lady, you are care or tan, honey, kitchen, and winning and camera. At the man, I should have been in it. Will they be Kalate, waiting and me? Aladana dilili, aladana dilili, aladana bata kurai, aladana makan, aladana bar kailu, aladana bar kainangai, aladana dilili, aladana makan, aladana bata kurai, aladana bata kurai, aladana dilili.
Oh, it's good. Nel. Nel. Yes. Nadoni. How are you? Hello. Hello. Nice to meet you. Hi. Can I see? I look inside? Maybe a little look. Oh. Boy, nice. Nice. Are you sleeping there? Hello. Smile to me. Ten. Two girls enough. 10, yes.
20.
20? Yeah. Two.
20.
No, two, eh? Two.
20.
Yes. Your girlfriends, eh? Hi. Cheese. 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 Hello. Ooh. One or two? Yes, you're little, eh? One? Two bear? Ah, you're a nice one. Where's your lip? Yes, put it in. Put it in. Yeah, it does. It's fake. This is fake. You put it in. It's fake. You put it in. Yes. Why? Why no? You cannot put it in. You fake. You fake. You put it in. You cannot put it in. Now, one bear, eh? That's a fake photo. 3.
Okay.
2.
Okay.
1.
Okay.
2 bear. Thank you. What do you say? What do you say? Thank you. Thank you. Oh ja, ik wil... No, ik wil niet zo'n dingetje. No.
I see. How many bear? It's a very big one. Together, 7. 7. 7. 2. We are girlfriends, eh? We meet each other so. Ooh. Very nice. Okay. Very nice. Doei.
Oh no.
Hello. You make a deal. Hallo ballon. Ja, ballonfoto. Kijk. Wij maken zaken. 1. Thank you. Push out my head. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wait. Oh. Was het zo wijd? Thank you. 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 Dit werd de Mercy. Jongen. Very hard. They're pushing and but the balloons are very successful. Oh, one picture, one bird. No, one picture, one balloon. Oh, it's great. Oh, this is a highlight from our holiday.
Ba chalim ngana ne ywana bra chara marra man aje na ai kiwan ai ke na ka a ha ge honya ai kiwan ai ba ngapa du mana ai ke no ngani.
My head is full of emotion. Yeah. It's not normally so as the people live here. It's not normally, I think. And we make them so, eh? We make it's not good. I think it's not good. The little children see that when they growing up with only make pictures, make money. Pictures make money. I think it's not good. For the future, this is no good. I think. Okay.
Ani ura ga belle ura honya na yo yo hina ki ali mai tum chai ali kono na ngama ti ali hona del ne no ani ko diko hiru bu ba tin na ngama ti ura kwa ki wi na sara na ngan ke del na khara bu en she na ngan ko yen ngan ngama ti wana hagin ajai no no kula hi ngan boy bar ne na ni.
I feel guilty about this. We can change. This has happened and they must stop tourists. They must say no more tourists in that spirit. At home I will say it's very heavy to go there and it's how it is. It's very difficult to make contact with people without money.
Hola kuno achalli an ko ke chalen na hola kuno no ai biro chi ko ramar ma hunna te hira gerta ha ni ngama te ko le ke gerti bira ragala ni ko de bina raman na ken ke ko de bina raman na hali ka ko hali ha gena jana antu hira na nu ko jala na ani ke ken ngani ani kai no hullo.
The next time that when I go, I take no pictures. I think I walk and I make contact with the people, and that's it.
Ana hula aku ki aji kuranya ngabunu me ana ki ali ki traino tane na ana ode ratru mel na ku to ana hulle wa nganna to kayo na ki ginonyo ngani kaldeo she na kirdeo ana lo agen ki siron me ana hula ko lai hu ngani an ki ko lo agen.
Oh, this is nice. The woman with the little child. I see happiness in her eyes. The woman with the little child with white faces. The man with very black skin. Paint his whole body. That's a nice one. The big earrings. That's also a nice picture, but so serious. Yes, when I see her eyes, it do something with me. I'm crying again. The lady with the big lip plate, I think that's the best one. I like pictures with happiness, not sadness. I see kindness in her eyes. I think we like each other.
Anyana huli hoine ani jonya jani bro ka ko ke bang tana he na de ke ko ai tin da he na ko dori ai o den ko ke jen ani ka ngapuri ni be kuri kini ba ta kini dane te ko wakata be kara kini dane ani jamera ni ka ngapuri yo ko ya batani ori nei kana huli ko ra ka ga na hulla ngani ngahonya ani ka kimaya.
$0.12. All right, well, we'll conclude there. So don't forget to answer that question, and you will already have part of the exam already. All right, thank you. Email me with any questions that you have. Thank you.